What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Gameweek 17 deadline. So I'm going to go through the latest press conference updates, and because we've had the World Cup break and some players have come back late and with injuries and are doubtful, there is quite a few updates. So I'm going to go through all of them, show you what my team is currently looking like, and then go through some of your questions as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's quickly talk about our sponsor. So happy to say that this video has been sponsored by Pooky. If you haven't heard of Pooky before, it's a sports prediction app that is currently in its free to play version. So I've already signed up. My username is of course Let's Talk FPL. If you want to sign up as well, there is a link in the description below. The cool thing is there's a lot of different leagues that you can see on screen to make your predictions in, but if you're someone like me that prefers to stick to just Premier League, you can do that because each different league has its own leaderboard. So when you sign up, you're able to choose 2 Pooky balls, and they have different attributes on them that help boost your overall points when you make correct predictions, and you want to choose them based on what your play style is and what different leagues you want to try and predict. So for me, I know I'm going to mostly concentrate on the Premier League, so this first Pooky ball here gives me a 10% boost if I make a correct prediction on the Premier League, and 20% boost if that team also includes Wolves as well. So I'm definitely going to select that one. I think I'm just going to take the Bundesliga one because that's probably the second league that I'd want to make predictions on the most, but ultimately I'm probably going to use the Premier League most of the time. So I'm just going to jump in and make some predictions for match day 17. So I'll click into Everton versus Wolves first of all, and you can see on the right hand side it's selected the correct Pooky ball. I've got a 10% boost for any Premier League matches that I correctly predict. You can change to a different Pooky ball, but obviously the only one I've got at the moment is for the Bundesliga, so that's no good for this prediction. But if I wanted to go and make some Bundesliga predictions as well, I could use that instead, and as you play more and more, you'll collect more Pooky balls and level them up as well. So I think this will be quite a tight affair, so I'm going to go for 1-0 to Everton. So each prediction you make costs a certain amount of energy. So you can see on the right side, prediction cost here is 10 energy, and I've got 81 left because I've already made a couple of predictions. So if you click onto that in the top right hand corner, at the moment you can refill that back to 100 completely free. When that changes, you'll just use their in-house currency, which is POC, and that will allow you to obviously increase your predictions. So later on, you're going to have to be a bit more careful about exactly which predictions you make, but at the moment you can just refill that for free. And that is it. It's fairly straightforward. Like I said, I'm already signed up. My username is Let's Talk FPL. If you want to sign up and start making your predictions, there's a link in the description below. Every single league has its own leaderboard and therefore has its own rewards as well. So the top 10 in each leaderboard will win a share of 1,000 Matic tokens as well. So if you haven't already signed up, link in the description below. Get making your predictions now. Before we get into the injury news and the press conference updates, I wanted to talk about this tweet that was sent to me in a reply where I kind of jokingly said, I need people to start taking Trippier out of their drafts just so that I have the confidence to do it too. And Brett replied to me and said, we are so spoiled for choice, it's doing people's heads in, I reckon. Any draft feels wrong because you're leaving out 5 players who would be absolute gifts in any other season. And I think that's absolutely true. Now, don't get me wrong, when we have like unlimited transfers at the start of the season, or like we do now, or when we're building wildcards, FPL managers always have a fear of missing out on certain players, a player that they want in but they can't get. And I know it's really cliche for me as a content creator, just like loads of other content creators will say that you can't have everyone, but I think in some ways it's more true now than it has been over past seasons. Like I look at people's squads that they're building and it's very difficult to make a bad draft, and that's why right now I feel like a lot of the time I'm saying things like, yes, that player's a good option, I like that player, but I'm not going to own them because we only have 15 spots to fill. So what I did was put this list up on the right hand side, and it could have had more players in it, and by the way, I may end up having Mason Mount as you'll see in a minute, but Almiron, Mason Mount, Foden, De Bruyne, Kulusevski, Nketiah, Kane, Nunez, Trossard, Fernandes, Son and Dunk, they are all perfectly reasonable players to have in your draft, and apart from Mason Mount, I don't have any of them in mind, and yet I still think my draft looks good, but I could turn around and see someone else's that has like 7 or 8 players different, and theirs looks really good as well. It's like I talked about on the Game Week preview about how viable the 3 premium attacker setup is right now. It may not be the route that I go, but I don't look at it and think that's not a good idea. Whereas last year, I definitely did. And there will be some players that I don't think are great options. So for example, if you had like 5-ish million to spend on a defender, I really like Gabriel, I really like Ben White, you could take a punt on a Man City defender. I do think it's probably a mistake to choose Eric Dyer, for example, but when it comes to £8 million midfielders, I think probably Mount and Saka are the best, then Foden, then Kulusevski. So I've got Kulusevski in 4th place, but I don't look at people's drafts with him in and think that is a bad pick, because it's just not. So for any of you that are, especially when it's kind of Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, for those of you that are kind of celebrating that, you're probably stressing over your draft. I wouldn't worry too much. It is very difficult right now to make a really, really bad draft. Although maybe some of you have done that. Maybe I've done that. Who knows? But I just wouldn't stress about it too much. Let's talk about Mitrovic first of all. Essentially, he is a doubt for game week 17 against Crystal Palace away. Like a lot of the quotes you're going to see in this video, I've taken them from Fantasy Football Scout. Make sure to follow them if you're not already. So Marco Silva said that Alexander Mitrovic is a doubt for the Crystal Palace match with a reoccurrence of the foot problem that plagued him before the World Cup. And this is what he actually said. You are trying to get him in his best physical condition again to see if he's fit or not for Crystal Palace. If not for Crystal Palace, will be for the next one. Let's hope. So even if he misses Crystal Palace, it's not guaranteed that he'll play against Southampton either. And that kind of makes him now, in my eyes, not as good an option for our Game Week 17 squads. And it does kind of put me off a little bit. If you remember, before the World Cup, he missed Game Weeks 15 and 16. Now, I remember thinking at the time, probably discussed it on videos, that he was going to miss that game, but I was pretty sure he would play in the World Cup, which is what's happened. But the fact he's now come back and the same injury is still causing him issues, I just wonder if it's worth taking the risk on him. Now, he does have a double game week, and obviously if he misses Palace and Southampton, he's only got to get through that Leicester game without a yellow card, then he'll get to play that double game week. And I've seen some people say that you could start with him and bench him. That is definitely an option as well, if you think he's outright the best option for kind of 7 million or less when it comes to forwards. But for me, it's kind of put me off enough not to own him anymore. And the one kind of thing I would say, like the one good thing, if you are someone that wants to go for him, if we come on to Mitrovic here, or just look at Fulham's fixtures in general, the match against Palace is on Monday, and it's worth saying he has not been completely ruled out. There is a chance that he will play in that game. Silva has just said that he's a doubt. He did say that before the World Cup and he did miss out, but doesn't mean the same thing's going to happen again. But that's on Monday. The next game against Southampton isn't until the Saturday. So he does have quite a bit of time to get ready for that match. My main concern after that would be if he does happen to miss Palace and Southampton, I don't know what the odds of that are. The next match against Leicester is on the Tuesday. That is a quick turnaround. So then you're thinking, okay, will he be ready for Leicester? So I don't think it's a complete deal breaker that you now cannot go for him whatsoever. The fixtures are still okay. If he does get back sooner rather than later, he's nailed on when he's fit. He's on penalties and all that kind of good stuff. And there's not a huge amount of other players you can say that cost 7 million or less. But I think when we're putting a squad together where we essentially have a wild card, I want to go for players that are fit, that are available. So I don't, as you'll see later, I don't have Mitrovic in my current draft. I don't think he's necessarily now a complete avoid, but I do think you've really got to be sure that he is the best option and he will be back for that Southampton game for sure if you're going to pick him. So now on to Chelsea. Now I actually quote tweeted another tweet with some of my thoughts, but essentially the important stuff for FPL, Graham Potter confirmed that Reece James is back in training, that he played 65 minutes in the friendly the other day. That is enough for me to completely lock him in my Game Week 17 squad. If you've watched my draft videos, you'll know that I wanted him anyway, so it wouldn't have taken much for me to confirm him in the squad. But that is it for me. He didn't go on to say just how fit he is or anything like that, but I've talked before about how much rest time Chelsea had between fixtures in Game Week 17, 18 and 19, and I think there's a good chance that Reece James plays at least 2 of those fixtures from the start, possibly all 3. And as you can see in the bottom tweet, Ruben Loftus-Cheek is still out as well, and he is one of the players that you've seen fill in at right wing back before. I mean, someone like Azpilicueta, if he was fit and available, he could play there too, but there's not a huge amount of competition for Reece James, and ultimately he is the best option they have there. So I'm hopeful and somewhat confident he'll play at least 2 of the next 3, hopefully all 3 in both games in the double as well. So he's in for me. Ben Chilwell is still out. I didn't see a time frame for how long that is. I wouldn't say that makes Cucurella absolutely nailed, but it does help. My general thoughts are, in a back 4, he will play left back when Chilwell is out. If they play a back five, his position isn't as certain. I think the 2 games before the World Cup break, they had Lewis Hall play at left wing back, and Cucurella did play left centre back in one of the games, but didn't play in the other one. So he's not guaranteed to play in a 5 at the back formation because Potter doesn't usually play him as a wing back, so he has to play left centre back, and he might not always play there. So I think Cucurella is an okay option, still at 5.1 million, but if you can, I would just spend the extra on Reece James instead at 5.8. He also mentioned that Mendy has had a couple days training. Didn't mention Kepa, but Kepa we know has been in training. He did seem to be first choice before the World Cup break. So again, that is enough for me to pick him in my squad for just 4.5 million. So that's most of the kind of important stuff on Chelsea. Obviously, Kante is going to be out for a while. That's not necessarily good for clean sheets, and I appreciate that those of us going for Chelsea defenders, it is a bit more of hope than anything else because of the fixtures and the quality of players they've got, because they haven't really done it so far this year. But I just think Kepa is too good to turn down at 4.5, and I love Reece James. So if he's fit and available, he's going to be in the squad. So there were a few things from Pep Guardiola's press conference, and obviously we saw Man City play against Liverpool in the Carabao Cup as well. A couple of minor things. Calvin Phillips is not fit. That doesn't really matter from an FPL point of view. Julian Alvarez will have a week or 10 days off because of the World Cup final win. Again, that doesn't hugely matter. We're expecting Haaland to start most games anyway. It's only if Haaland is out that I would probably look at Alvarez, unless he gets a run in the team because loads of other players are injured. The big news is probably that Ruben Dias returned from Qatar with a hamstring issue and is set to miss the festive schedule. I think I saw elsewhere that he could be out for up to a month. So straight away that has got people asking questions about whether Akanji or Stones or Ake or Laporte suddenly become options. Yes, that means there's less competition without Ruben Dias there, but there's still quite a few centre-backs for only 2 spots in Ake and Laporte that can play left centre-back or even left back, and then you've got Akanji and Stones that can play right centre-back or right back as well. So I still think if you've got the money, then you should just be going for Cancelo. He didn't play any minutes, I don't think, against Liverpool. That's not necessarily an issue because Pep Guardiola did say that those that played in the World Cup are almost in better match rhythm than those that have been sat at home. And we know from the past that Cancelo is someone that is usually fit and usually available all the time for Pep. So I'm not too concerned about it. I know he got it looked like he got dropped by Portugal, but obviously it's different when you're playing for your club. Like we've seen De Bruyne play much better against Liverpool than he did for Belgium, for example. So I'm not too worried about Cancelo. If you want the most nailed defender, it is still probably him. Kyle Walker may play the majority of games, but I think if you go for any other Man City defender, you are kind of accepting that they're going to miss the odd game here or there, because Kyle Walker is not necessarily nailed at right back, because Cancelo can play there, then one of Laporte or Ake can play left back, the other one can play left centre back, and then you've got either Akanji or Stones at right centre back, and that is just showing you the competition that is there. And I know I talked about the fact that Akanji obviously played 8 games in a row, I think it was, for Man City before the World Cup break. But Stones was injured for some of them. And then obviously Kyle Walker was out. So when Stones came back in, he played right back. Right now, Kyle Walker is back. So that does give Akanji some competition. So there's no guarantee that he will continue to play all of those matches. He may go on to play like 5 or 6 in the next 7, but it's hard to call. So if you want to save that money, nothing wrong with doing that whatsoever. But you cannot want or think that they're going to be as nailed on as Cancelo. So if you've got the money, he's the one to go for. If not, it's kind of take your pick. I don't even know who's the second most nailed. I guess I would probably go for Kyle Walker, but even that is not assured. So yeah, just take your pick and hope for the best after that, I would say. So just a quick one on Isak and Newcastle. So Eddie Howe is hopeful that Alexander Isak can make a return in January, but the forward will probably not be ready for the next 2 games. So he looks likely to miss game week 17 and 18, possibly 19 as well. And then we'll have to see how he's integrated back into the team. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because of Callum Wilson. Lots of people have been asking what happens when Isak is back. Now I've said this before, and we don't really know because we haven't seen all of Almiron, Wilson, Isak, Isak and St. Maximin fit at the same time. But I think no matter what, Callum Wilson plays if he's fit and if he's available. Obviously, if they get into a period of time where there is just a lot of fixture congestion and all those players are fit, he might be on the bench for the odd game. But I'm not worried about that over the next kind of 3 to 4 game weeks, possibly even longer. I think it's more likely that the other 3 rotate around him. Obviously, Almiron played brilliantly before the World Cup, so I'd be surprised if he got dropped anytime soon. But they do have really good players in St. Maximin and Isak as well. So I think it's absolutely possible that Wilson and Isak play together. Isak, previous clubs, has played kind of on the right and on the left at times, so he can do that. So if you're thinking about Callum Wilson, I think he's a really nice option. And Isak returning soon-ish wouldn't really worry me at all. So a couple of things from Arteta and Arsenal. So Reece Nelson will be out for weeks. Emile Smith-Rowe is close to making a return. So the likes of Saka and Martinelli look absolute guaranteed for starts and minutes at the moment. For what it's worth, even if those 2 players were back, I would still think that's the case. But I guess there's more chance of them missing minutes in terms of coming off a little bit earlier when those 2 are available. Saliba will return tomorrow. So whether or not he plays against West Ham, I'm not sure. I think in the friendly it was Gabriel and Holding as the centre-back. But obviously when Saliba is available to play again, he will go straight back in. I think from an FPL perspective, unless you got on Saliba when he was cheaper, in which case it might be worth holding and benching for a week or 2, there's no reason to even worry about him because Gabriel is cheaper with better goal threat at 5.2 million compared to Saliba, who I think is 5.3, and Ben White is 4.7 if you just want to go for the cheapest option to get those clean sheets. So unless you already owned him, Saliba doesn't really matter to me. I guess there's less chance of a clean sheet if he's not playing, but for the most part he's going to play the majority of games when he's fit and back available. And then the kind of bigger one, which we already knew Gabriel Jesus was out, they didn't give a time frame on it, but they described it as a huge blow, which makes me think he's going to be out for a little while. A lot of people have been asking me what I think that means for Arsenal attack. I guess to some extent the defence as well, because obviously Gabriel Jesus does a lot of pressing and winning the ball back from the front. I think it will affect them. I don't think they'll be quite as good, but I don't think the drop-off will be so big that it makes their players bad options, right? Martinelli and Saka are still extremely good value. The defence is definitely good value as well. So wouldn't change my opinion on those players. Obviously, it brings Nketiah into play. There's been some comments around the fact that Martinelli could play as a forward, but it hasn't happened that often. I think he will mostly play on the left, and I don't think it necessarily even makes him a better option if he plays as the number 9. So I think Nketiah will get pretty good minutes in that number 9 position. Whether or not he should be in your squads is a bit of a trickier one because for me, if you compare him to someone like Martial, for example, Martial is a good option for Man United because you're unlikely to want to triple up. If you do want a second player, it's probably Rashford. Whereas with Nketiah, if you go for him and you block yourself off from getting a second or obviously a third Arsenal player, there are lots of other good options like Saka, like Martinelli, like Odegaard, like White, like Gabriel. And I'm just not sure I'd want to put Nketiah in for that reason. But if you're confident in what he can do and you think he's a better option than the other Arsenal players that you can pick, or you're just not interested in a triple up right now anyway, I think Nketiah is a really good cheap forward to be looking at because although the fixtures on paper are not great, Arsenal are a very good side. They're putting up good XG this season so far per match. Per 90 minutes, they're only just behind Man City. And Nketiah is obviously a cheap price. So I wouldn't try and put anyone off going for him. But I think there's lots of other good Arsenal players, and that's probably what I would personally look first. So with the final thoughts videos, I don't usually go through this much injury news and press conference updates, but obviously we've got unlimited transfers and we've just had a World Cup, so there's quite a bit of information. And obviously, like I've just said, people are considering a broad range of kind of options for their squads. So rather than go through all the other press conferences, I've just taken down what I would consider the main notes that are important from an FPL point of view. So Firmino is going to be out for a couple of games. In terms of minutes, I think Salah looked good anyway. This definitely broadens the appeal of Nunez because his minutes are definitely going to go right up. Firmino's out, Jota's out, Diaz is out as well. I wouldn't expect Nunez to miss too many games, at least in the near future. There is obviously a conversation to be had about whether that makes Liverpool a worse team, especially when they are missing Jota and Diaz as well. But if you wanted to go for Nunez, I don't think that would put me off. So Firmino's out for a couple of games. Hopefully he'll be back after that. Klopp did say that Trent will hopefully be better. He missed the game against Man City in the Carabao Cup wasn't part of the full session. But remember that a lot of the press conferences were on Friday, and the deadline's not until Monday, and some teams will play on Tuesday as well. So I guess over the weekend, players may become available and fitter, etc. But on the flip side, I guess they could get injured as well. So we'll have to wait and see. Antonio and Scamacca are both doubts for the Arsenal game for West Ham. Moyes did say that Jared Bowen could play as a number 9. I think ultimately most of us aren't looking at West Ham players anyway, but it probably makes Arsenal defenders better, especially for those of you that were going to have like Ben White on the bench and Mitrovic playing. If you wanted to go for Mitrovic, like I spoke about earlier, you could bench him and play your Arsenal defender or anyone else you got on the bench instead. James Maddison's got a knee problem, needs to be assessed. I think at this point, Kulusevski, Mount, Saka and Foden are probably just all better options than Maddison anyway, especially because of that. Emi Martinez is going to miss the Villa game. I wouldn't... When players are out injured, important players, especially goalkeepers, I think we tend to overemphasise how good that is for the opposition. And obviously Martinez missing out is big for Liverpool. But if you weren't interested in Salah, you weren't interested in Nunez, I don't personally think this should now make you interested in them. It should just be a nice thing if you were going to own them anyway, if that makes sense. Like, Martinez is a very good goalkeeper, good shot stopper, but he's not the only part of that defence. So it's good if you've got Liverpool players, but I don't think... Maybe if you're on the fence about them, that might be the thing that tips you over. But obviously, he wasn't going to play in every single game or team that Liverpool are going to face anyway. Couple more. Ten Hag on Lisandro Martinez, just for anyone that's thinking about a Man United defender. He just said he has to understand that on December 27th, the Premier League will go on. That kind of sounded like I want him back, but he didn't say whether he would be back. Don't know about Varane either. I don't think Dalot was even mentioned. So if you were thinking about him and you really want a Man United defender, I'd probably just go for Shaw. But ultimately, I just don't think you really need a Man United defender right now. No news on when Sancho will be back. McAllister for Brighton has been given 2 weeks off because of the World Cup final. And Webster will miss Game Week 17 and Game Week 18, just in case you were looking for a cheaper route into the Brighton defence. I think if you're going to go for a Brighton defender, you probably just go for Dunk and just pay that a little bit extra. So I think this is the last bit on press conferences, and this is about Spurs. So Conte has said that Ivan Perisic is back and available for Game Week 17. So I have seen a video going around that was posted on the Spurs Twitter account, which shows Perisic getting back into training with the rest of the squad. So that's obviously good for Spurs. I think for anyone that's considering Doherty, he probably will start against Brentford because he's been playing well in the friendlies at left wing back. He scored plenty of goals as well. But once Perisic is fit enough to start a game, that then causes problems for Doherty on the left side, and he has to go back to the right. And Emerson Royale, I think, is back as well, so that provides competition. Now, I agree with most people that Doherty is definitely better going forward. Maybe there's a question about defensively between the two, but going forward, Doherty is much, much better than Emerson Royale. But as we saw before the World Cup, that didn't necessarily mean that he played every game, and there was rotation there. So you might be okay for Brentford, possibly even Aston Villa with Doherty. But after that, I just don't think there's a guarantee that he plays. And we saw that before the World Cup. People went for him and he didn't end up being a great pick. And I think that's probably the case now. He's very exciting when he plays, right? I love owning Matt Doherty, and he's only 4.6 million. I think you can probably get safer, more solid options for that money. Lloris hasn't trained but will be on the bench. I think Fraser Forster is going to play in goal, but obviously Lloris will be back after that. Romero will hopefully be back for Game Week 18. So in general, it doesn't necessarily make the Spurs defence better when someone like Romero and Lloris are out. So that's almost like another mark against Doherty, I would say. But they should be back from kind of 18 onwards. And Richarlison will be sidelined for 3 to 4 weeks. So the likes of Son, Kane and Kulusevski, when they're fit and available, they should start most games until Richarlison is back. And then he might start taking minutes off some of them. So as it stands, this is what my draft currently looks like. There's a few changes since the last one. Obviously, we've got more information now from press conferences and stuff like that. So Mitrovic has gone, for example, because I'm just not willing to take that risk. I don't think he's necessarily a bad pick, but he's not someone that I'm probably going to go for. I'm also not going to promise this will be the exact team by the time we get to the Game Week 17 deadline. I might get a change of mind over the weekend. There might be even more information that comes out, but this is it as it stands. Now, one thing it doesn't have is any Brighton players, because unless we get the double game weeks confirmed, you know, the ones that are possible, like Brighton could get a double, Arsenal could get another one in 21, Everton, etc. Unless they're confirmed before the deadline, I don't know if I want to put too much emphasis on getting those players in my team. if you had like a bit more money or you didn't want to go for Gabriel on the bench like I have, you could go for Dunk and then hope they get the double. But if they don't, it'll then feel like you're stuck with those players. So unless it's announced, I'm probably going to go without them. But I have left some money in the bank, 1.3 million, for some possible upgrades, which I'll talk as I go through the squad. So just to go through some of the players that are either locked in or close to. Kepa, I would say, is locked in. James is locked in. Cancelo's pretty close to being locked in. I think I'm going to go for Salah over De Bruyne, but I'm not completely sure about it. That's one of those decisions where if you show me a draft with De Bruyne in, I would not argue with you and I would not try and convince you to get Salah. I think they're both good options, but I'll probably go for Salah. Martinelli, I would say, is locked in. I think Rashford is pretty much locked in as well. One of the reasons I've got the money in the bank is to do Rashford to Trossard. So we know that Man United have got 3 good fixtures coming up. Nottingham Forest, Wolves and Bournemouth, I think it is. Then it gets a bit trickier. Not to the point where Rashford is a must-sell, but if Brighton do get a double in 21, I would happily do Rashford to Trossard. So that's one of the reasons for money in the bank. Mason Mount is purely in there for fixtures and nothing else. I know he hasn't been great this season. I know his underlying numbers, expected goals, expected assists are down. But when you look at the minutes of all players under Graham Potter so far since he came in, Mason Mount is at the top, right? So he is likely to start. They've got Bournemouth at home, Forest away, a double game week, then Palace at home. I don't think that is the biggest risk to my squad by going for him. And again, there is money in the bank to do Mason Mount up to Saka instead. There's still a chance that I just start with Saka because he's been so good this season. He's on penalties. If Arsenal carry on as they have been before the World Cup, they'll still be great picks. But I'm a sucker for a double game week. So I think I'll probably go for Mason Mount. Haaland is locked in. I think Wilson and Martial are mostly locked in. But as someone pointed out on my stream the other day, if I did Gabriel to Ben White, and I'll come on to why I've got Gabriel in a minute, but if I did Gabriel to Ben White, that would give me 1.8 million, and that would give me enough money to do Wilson to Nunez. And I do really like Nunez, but I don't know how convinced I am that he's a much, much better option than Wilson. He does get a lot of chances, but Newcastle have been brilliant. They're 4th best for expected goals this season. Wilson's own personal numbers are good. When he's fit, he's absolutely nailed on. I think that will be the case even when Isak, Saint-Maximin and Almiron are also all fit. And he's on penalties as well. And Newcastle have got some pretty good fixtures. Let's not forget that. Like, a lot of you are obviously keeping Trippier. So am I, probably. Leicester away, Leeds at home. Arsenal away is tricky. But 3 of the next 4 are pretty good for Wilson. And if Mitrovic does come back, and I don't want to sell Martial, Wilson's also a route to him as well. So I wouldn't say Wilson is locked, but I quite like him. I think he's a really nice pick. And then Martial for the fixtures, just because of Mitrovic, is a doubt. If Mitrovic wasn't a doubt, then he would be in instead of one of Martial or Wilson. Probably Martial, but I can't guarantee that. Trippier is someone that I'm probably going to keep. I think if the double game weeks got announced and Brighton had one and I wanted to get a Brighton defender in, and Arsenal also had their double in 21 and I wanted to keep Gabriel, I'd probably need to sell Trippier, but I'm doing everything I can to keep him because he's been so good. So he will probably stay. Then on the bench, I've gone back to Ward because we don't know if Sanchez or Guaita or Pickford will get a double game week, so I just don't want to spend the money on them. I could always do Kepa to one of those players if I wanted to. Andreas, for obvious reasons. I still think 3-5-2 could work. But it is just tempting to keep Andreas Pereira, play him in a double, and just have him as a really good bench option in a 3-4-3. The one thing I'm concerned about with 3-5-2, if the doubles don't get announced now, before the deadline, but they do later on, well, that's a bunch of transfers that I've got to use. There might be injuries, there might be suspensions, that's more transfers. If I then want to go back to a 3-4-3, that's 2 moves to do that, as well as all that other stuff I've talked about. So I feel like, from a structure perspective, I'd probably just start in the 3-4-3. But then again, I might be convinced by Monday. Who knows? But that's what I'm at right now. And then Bueno, just because he's super cheap. I think Patterson's an option as well for 4 million. If Everton get that double in game week 21, you might want to play him instead. But I'm on Bueno right now. And as I've said in previous videos, I think that Gabriel is worth the 0.5 over Ben White if you've got it. I know some people would prefer Ben White and Nunez instead of Gabriel or Wilson. But if someone gets injured in this squad, for like a short amount of time, like 1 or 2 games, I'd happily play Gabriel in most fixtures because the Arsenal defence is decent and he's a bit of a monster when it comes to, you know, set pieces, free kicks and corners for goal threat. I think he is easily the best Arsenal defender to own from an FPL point of view if you've got the funds to spend. You could definitely make the argument that if I'm going to play Trippier, Cancelo and James in most games, why am I spending so much to have him on the bench? But it just gives me that peace of mind if somebody gets injured. Like, Martial could pick up a knot by the time we get to game week 18, and if I don't want to be forced to sell him straight away, I could just play Gabriel instead in some of those fixtures. So that's what the squad's looking like. I won't go into too much more detail because it could change a little bit by Monday, but I think most of the players at this stage are pretty much locked in. Okay, so let's go through some of your questions. How would you rank Wilson, Martial, Nketiah and Mitrovic? So going on the information that I have at the time recording, I actually think I would just rank them in the order you've written them and the order that I've put them in the images. So Wilson's probably the best option. Absolutely nailed when fit and available. Good minutes when he plays and he's on penalties as well. He's playing for a team that have put up the 4th best expected goals so far this season per 90 minutes. Very attacking side. I think if you disregard the price, because the other 3 are all cheaper, Wilson's the best option of those 4. I've got Martial ahead of Nketiah just because of what I spoke about earlier, in that in isolation, Martial versus Nketiah, it's close, but Arsenal have got a lot of other good players that you could go for instead. With Man United, it's not quite the same. Like, you could have Rashford and you could have a Man United defender and triple up, but I don't think you're going to suddenly be stuck because you want Bruno Fernandes, for example, because he's just so expensive. He's never really going to be a massive worry. So that's the only reason I've got Martial ahead of Nketiah, but I think they're very close. And then I've put Mitrovic last just because he's a doubt. Don't get me wrong, if he was fully fit, fully available, he would probably be first or second, right? Second or first on this list, ahead of Martial and Nketiah, just because you know you're never going to have to worry about selling him unless he gets injured. And I know he's got this foot injury at the moment, but he doesn't tend to be that injury prone of a player, but I think because he's doubtful and because Silva said, you know, if he doesn't play Palace, we hope he plays Southampton, that just puts too many doubts in my mind. So that's how I'm going to rank them. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So forget the cheap forwards for a second. Let's talk about the more expensive ones. What are your thoughts on a triple up of Kane, Haaland and Darwin would have Rashford, Trossard and Martinelli in midfield? This comes down to what I said right at the start of the video, where I mentioned that it's really difficult to make a bad squad. And even though I haven't really considered this whatsoever, I think about the 2 midfielders that I have in my squad, Rashford and Martinelli, where you've got them both. Okay, I have Mason Mount or possibly Saka in that position where you've got Trossard. But it's not like Trossard is a bad option, and all 3 of those forwards are good as well. So it's hard to know without looking at the rest of the team, because I would assume there's no £8 million midfielder there. And you could argue that someone like, I won't argue for Mount, but you could argue for someone like Saka is almost as good an option as Nunez for less money. He's also on penalties as well. It doesn't matter right now for Nunez minutes because Diaz and Jota are going to be out for at least a month, maybe more. I think Diaz is out until March. So Nunez's minutes are going to be better anyway for Liverpool. But Saka is always reliable and on those penalties. So you could compare them, but you save money with Saka, right? And I would say maybe there's been a compromise in defence. I don't know if you've got Cancelo as well. Maybe you've got great team value and you've got all those players I've just mentioned. But I personally wouldn't make those sacrifices to have this forward line. But again, I don't think it's bad either. Harry Kane, 11.6 million, 1 yellow card off a suspension. That would worry me a little bit. But on the flip side, he's been brilliant this season for Spurs. He's on penalties as well. His minutes are always good. I just don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just not how I would build a squad. But it's perfectly okay to go a bit different because there's not many ways you can make a bad squad right now, like I've said before. There have been a surprising number of questions about Havertz. In the live stream that I did on Friday, I would say there was more questions about Havertz than there were about Phil Foden, which I was a little bit surprised about because I know Chelsea got good fixtures in the double, but the same applies to Man City as well. But anyway, the question's not about Foden, it's about Havertz. With Broja injured, is Havertz a good shout? Potter doesn't fancy Aubameyang all that much. The problem is, he may think that Havertz is better than Aubameyang, but from what we've seen so far, there has been rotation, and I cannot sit here and tell you that that has changed because we haven't seen enough matches. Now, I know in the behind closed doors friendly, Havertz got a hat-trick, so I'm sure that's done a lot to impress Potter, and he may start the first fixture for Chelsea after the World Cup break. But does that mean he's definitely going to start the game after that and the one after that? I just do not know. I guess with Broja out of the picture, that is one less competition. A bit like the Man City defenders, right? Diaz is out, so that's a bit less competition, but there's still competition there. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean... I'm not trying to put you off going for Havertz. Absolutely not, because I really like him as a player, and I think he is a good FPL option when he gets the minutes. And if we come over to the Chelsea team, which I've already got up, he's only 7.7 million. So I do see the appeal, right? I'm talking about Haaland, Kane, Nunez, Martial, Mitrovic and Nketiah. But Havertz isn't a lot more expensive than those kind of 6.5-ish million midfielders. And you know that I like the fixtures because I've talked about Mason Mount and James and Kepa quite a lot. So I guess it's one of those where I just don't hate the punt at all. He's only 2.7% owned. But if he starts against Bournemouth and gets benched against Nottingham Forest and then only plays one of the games in the double, I don't think you can be surprised whatsoever. I've seen some Chelsea fans with him in their FPL squads, so they're obviously somewhat confident that he will play. But I'm literally looking here now. I've got Twitter up on the other screen. There's another Chelsea fan I follow, and they've got Aubameyang starting and no Havertz in the starting lineup whatsoever. And for me, that is the main problem. That if he starts the first game, you just don't know if he's going to start the second. So if you're an FPL manager that likes to take a bit of a risk, I think Havertz is almost perfect. He's not too expensive. The fixtures are good. We know he can get points when he gets minutes. But if you're someone that's going to panic the first time he doesn't play, I just wouldn't start with him. There's cheaper options that are probably a little bit more reliable in that regard right now, like Martial and Nketiah in particular. So there we go. There was a lot covered in that, but hopefully you enjoyed it and found it useful. If you did, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. That will probably be the last pre-recorded video before the Game Week 17 deadline, unless there's like double Game Week news that gets confirmed or there's a major injury or something like that. I will probably try and take some time off on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, but I'll be back for the deadline stream on Boxing Day morning on the 26th of December, probably around 9:30. I think the deadline is 11 o'clock UK time, so make sure to tune in for that. If you're celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all that good stuff. If you're not, just have a good weekend either way. And don't forget to check out, if you haven't already, don't forget to check out Pooky. There is a link in the description below if you want to get signed up for that. As you can see, I have now made all 10 of my predictions for match day 17 in the Premier League. Otherwise, I will leave that video there. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to getting back into the Premier League and FPL once again. And obviously I'll see you on Monday for the deadline stream, maybe for another video. Let's see what happens, but hopefully this is the last one and it was useful. Give it a like, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon.